It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. Today is January 6th. 5 years ago, we almost lost our democracy. What happened at the Capitol wasn't a protest that got out of hand. It wasn't even spontaneous. It was an attempt to overturn a free and fair election, an attempt built on lies, reinforced by political leaders who have faced zero accountability, and carried out by Americans who were convinced that violence could interrupt the transfer of power. The danger to our democracy did not end when the Capitol was cleared. The fight has now shifted from accountability to narrative. Not whether January 6th happened, or whether anyone in power will suffer consequences, but rather how that day is memorialized. Most Americans remember January 6th through images, the mob, the flags, the broken windows. But those images don't explain how it came together and who was coordinating it, because that part of the story isn't cinematic. It doesn't make for good TV. It lives in records, messages, and data. That's where today's guest comes in. Denver Riggleman is a former Republican congressman from Virginia who was driven out of his party for refusing to go along. He later served as the senior technical advisor to the January 6th committee, helping analyze the data behind the attack. Not just what happened, but how it was organized. Denver isn't a talking head. He's a counterterrorism analyst by training, someone who focuses on systems and patterns. He's also a close friend. We've literally driven through minefields together in Ukraine, and I've seen firsthand how Denver operates under pressure. 5 years on, January 6th is no longer just a historical event. It's a test of whether we're willing to deal as a nation with uncomfortable facts and whether we will be able to recognize the warning signs when our democracy is under threat again. This conversation isn't about relitigating a single awful day. It's about understanding it clearly enough not to repeat it. Here's me and Denver Riggleman. Denver, welcome to the show. I used to think the worst thing that could happen about January 6th was memory holding it and forgetting the seriousness of what happened and the threat to our republic that it posed. It feels to me now like the worst thing is rewriting it, not forgetting it, but letting Trump and the Republicans say it was a heroic event, or on the other hand, an FBI plot, or an attempt to victimize patriotic insurgents, right? All of the signals are that the other side wants to not memory hole it, but celebrate it. When you look at the Oath Keepers being reconstituted by Stuart Rhodes, when you look at the pride that they take in that day, that to me is even worse. As someone who was at ground zero throughout the investigation, who probably understands more about what really happened than anybody else, what's your take?
It's the weaponization of ignorance and fantasy. It's really difficult. You know how careful I've been, Ken, when doing interviews, thinking for the first year or two, if you remember, Ken and I know we knew each other. We did movies together. We did documentaries together. And I remember during Jack Smith's investigation, I was so careful. I'm like, there's no way we're not going to get some kind of satisfaction with the criminal activities that were so acute in the lead up to January 6th and January 6th itself. And right now, I don't know if I've ever been more proud. I don't do this, but literally I've written the only book about what happened that day as far as the data, metadata. Actually, it might be the only book about what happened behind the door and why this was so important. And that was the breach. And it was a New York Times bestseller then, but it also got pilloried by certain groups on the left or right because they said shouldn't have been out there. And now it's the only one. 5 years later, I actually can't believe I wrote it. And when I look at the pardon of 1,500 individuals, all the Proud Boys, all the Oath Keepers that you mentioned, when I look at what's happened, we cannot allow this not only to be memory hold, but rewritten. And that's why I'm out. And I think it's time, buddy, where we even get more aggressive on the coup-like movements that were present that day.
And the data, you got to explain to people, is so much more of the story than the media ever was able to present to the American people. I mean, our version of what happened on January 6th is almost entirely limited to the video clips, the storming of the Capitol, the boots on Nancy Pelosi's desk. But the conspiracy, the involvement of senior folks in Trump world, that is captured in the data, not as much in the movie clips that everyone is letting drive the narrative about January 6th. It's what you dove into. And I can't remember how many records, but it's hundreds of thousands. It's lots of lines of information that really tell the deeper story about what happened that day.
Around 30 million lines of data.
30 million lines.
You're talking about millions of pages in call records. You're talking about the Meadows text messages. You're talking about we found the Ginny Thomas text messages within the Meadows text messages. I will say this, without my team, without the technical team, this investigation would have gone nowhere. The Meadows text messages provided a framework where they could actually do the investigation. When you're doing identity resolution types of things, and when I say identity resolution, let me explain it to your listeners. It's identifying using certain techniques, right, where they're forward or reverse lookups, what a phone number is actually connected to. When we got the actual records from Meadows, he didn't actually attach names to a majority of the phone numbers, thinking he was being slick. Also, the times were skewed, but we're very, very good. And we were able to identify about 99% of the numbers in the Meadows text messages, which actually showed the evolution of conspiracy and crime that was happening from the time we pegged those, which is around November 1st, might have been November 5th, all the way through January 30th.
Can I read that back real quick? You were able
Sure.
to assign actual names, individuals, to the numbers that the White House chief of staff was using to disguise his communications.
Correct.
And you were able to assign senders and receivers of those texts by name and essentially map out a conspiracy emanating from the Oval Office or the office right next to the Oval Office.
The chief of staff of the president, there's no way he wasn't aware. It's impossible. Donald Trump is the reason this happened because everybody was acting on his orders, on what he was saying in public. It's not like this is opaque. Richard Nixon taping himself was more surreptitious than Donald Trump. So let's just be honest here, right? And when I go through and explain it, right, I think people start to get the chills. They get freaked out because we were so close, because it just wasn't the storming of the Capitol. It was manipulating executive orders, which was huge. It was trying to force Pence into decision-making that would force a House of Representatives votes or a vote back to the people or a suspension of counting, right? The people need to understand it's very simple. Them radicalizing people towards violence, which is what they did, when they did that, it was a negotiation technique to throw the election back. That's all it was.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. Quick break for a shameless pitch for my Substack and Patreon pages. To all of you who have subscribed, thank you. Your support is what makes this show possible. Anytime you see in-person reporting, whether it's trips to Ukraine to show you what is really happening on the ground, or my recent conversations with Congressman Jason Crow and Senator Tammy Duckworth, where we got on-the-record commitments to back hearings into ICE's abuses of power.
People need to know that we're taking names.
All of this only happens with your support. Every dollar that comes in through Substack and Patreon goes back into this show. And with the holidays coming up, you can give gift subscriptions as well. The links are below. Thanks for everything. Your support means the world to me. Back to the show.
And the fact that they would go back and forth, Trump never really said to storm the Capitol. He said, be peaceful, but he said, we got to take it back. The message was already being filtered through his lieutenants like Roger Stone, like Alex Jones, who acted as a lieutenant, Mike Flynn, Steve Bannon, Sidney Powell, all these individuals. So I just find it amazing that we were able to do this. And Mark Meadows is the MVP of the January 6th investigation. The fact that he voluntarily gave those text messages up and we could track down those numbers, even people who tried to hide. If you think about Ginny Thomas, she registered her phone numbers under her maiden name.
Who's Ginny Thomas?
Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, right, who had some of the most nutcase QAnon text messages in the history of the United States. And she was talking directly to Jared Kushner and to Congress. She was very close to Louis Gohmert and her staff. So she was manipulating all three portions of our government, all three. And when you think about that, it's almost mind-blowing that we still don't have closure, and that maybe 45 to 50% of the American public will always think that January 6th was just a riot gone wrong or a day of peace or patriots trying to defend our Constitution, when it was actually completely based on fantasy. Every person there that day, whether they stormed the Capitol or not, was ignorant enough to believe lies. It's that simple. And I to this day, it's still hard for me to get my arms around it. When you think about that type of mass hysteria.
But that hysteria was engineered. This idea that January 6th was a spontaneous spasm of violence, it wasn't spontaneous. It was engineered, and you tracked the conspiracy leading up to that day in the metadata and in the messages themselves, back and forth between the most powerful players on the right and deep inside the Republican Party.
Exactly. Even the phone records, right? When you're looking at millions of pages of phone records, and it wasn't reported enough. Why was it never reported enough? When I wrote the book, we found that the Oath Keepers were attempting to actually text the White House. A reporter from NBC, and I knew who it was. It was a member of the Oath Keepers, contacted that person to go, yes, I was in constant contact with Andrew Giuliani. Why isn't that reported every day? Andrew Giuliani working for Trump. That means the Oath Keepers had a direct line to the White House. The Oath Keepers, Ken. Why wasn't it pursued that through the White House switchboard, somebody in the White House called a rioter at 4:34 p.m. local?
Outgoing. You're not talking about
outgoing,
just
not ingoing.
Random calls into because nutcases call the White House every time. You're talking about an outgoing call from the White House to who?
It was to an individual. And it is in reporting, name Anton, and people can go look at the reporting. But this individual was actually convicted. Lunick was the last name. So when you go and look at this, it was reported in, and CNN released it without me actually telling the name, right? So it was very interesting. And then people tried to backpedal, and the guy said, well, I never got the call. Well, metadata is very hard to argue against. That call went on for 9 seconds. And if it went to voicemail, we can see. And those are some of the things that we tried to not be too forthcoming with, because we thought Jack Smith, we thought these investigations would go forward. And so I was very careful in this book, because I said, it's all going to come out. But here's the thing, buddy. This even gets crazier. Nobody can find our hard drives of data that we sent to the Oversight Committee, to the archives, or to federal law enforcement. So now we have hard drives missing with all this data double encrypted, which means the FBI never saw our phone records. It's so astoundingly incompetent.
That was part 1 of my conversation with Denver Riggleman. Check out part 2 tomorrow, where we talk about what accountability might look like for the people, especially those in positions of authority who engineered the J6 insurrection. See you then.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.